What is time? Is time travel possible? How many dimensions are there? Imagine the year is 2075 and you're the first person to board a new spaceship that has been created by NASA over the course of tens of years, designed to be able to reach and exceed the speed of light and potentially accomplish time travel. As you accelerate you see stars stretching out, and all of a sudden you are in the year 1998 and your grandpa is 8 years old. For some reason you decide to murder him. But if he never met your grandmother, your mother would never have been born, neither you. But if you were never born you couldn't have killed your grandpa. This is known as the grandfather paradox. But time travel is not possible, right? Maybe. Time dilation is when time moves a little slower the faster you move. How is this possible? Isn't time something that's beyond the physical world, something that can't be affected or changed? Think of a water slide that is incredibly long, and on that water slide is you, and your friends, and also everyone in your country. Matter of fact, everything in the universe is on this slide, but that's not all. Everything that was in the universe, your grandfather, grand-grandfather, everything and everyone there has ever been and ever will. And the water in the slide is time. It moves at the same speed always. And along the slide there is everything that will happen. And every time something happens, you are passing by it. Imagine the water slide to be fourth dimensional. The water coming from every direction. Everyone that died hundreds of years ago and the dinosaurs coexists with you, they are just farther up the slide. Just like the real world we know. Something can exist at the same time as you, even if they are at the other side of the earth. But except for Earth, in the water slide you can't just travel to them. You are at the place you are, just like the yesterday version of your cousin is slightly behind you. But what if you can travel in this world? What if the faster you move, the slower you move in the slide? If this fourth-dimensional water were droplets smaller than atoms, completely invisible to us, coming from every direction at once. Every time a droplet touches you, you move a little forward, and there is the same amount of them everywhere. And if you moved incredibly fast, maybe a little fewer droplets would be able to touch you. At the speed of light so little droplets could touch you, that you basically stay still on the waterslide. And when you slow down, everything else has moved further down the slide. But hold on. This whole slide thing still doesn't explain the grandfather paradox. The many worlds interpretation is a theory that every time a decision is made, the universe splits into multiple parallel universes, one for every different outcome of the situation. Kind of like a forest, another higher dimensional concept to wrap your head around. I call this the infinite forest theory. Say this forest is in the fourth dimension. There is a tree that begins with a tree trunk. Actually it begins with a seed. The seed is under the floor of this fourth-dimensional space. So it is even beyond it. It is nothingness. Until it grows into a tree, of course. The Big Bang. Where nothing becomes everything. The seed grows a little tree trunk out of the ground. This is our universe 13.8 billion years ago. Every time something has more than one outcome, the tree splits into multiple branches. But only the ones that represents the outcome that actually happened continues to grow. The others then? They release a seed that grows into another tree where that outcome happened. And so on. Every dimension is in a forest one dimension higher. The trees are kind of like a painting of the universes they represent. A one-dimensional world with a creature that can move from side to side would have a tree in the second dimension. The world has 4 points it can move to. A, B, C and D. If the creature moved to the left, the tree would grow a branch to the left. The branch's length would be determined by how many points the creature moved to the left. The amount of different combinations of decisions grows vastly for every dimension, so one higher dimension is needed to paint the history of the universes. So is there only one original universe in our dimension, amongst so many other universes that represent things that didn't originally happen? That means we are probably just someone's mistake they didn't make. But wait. There are also so many other seeds waiting to become different original universes too. But, they don't. Why? Because the chance of a seed becoming a universe is actually unfathomably small. At least according to Roger Penrose, who said that the odds of everything we know existing, was 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. That is not 1 followed by 123 zeros. Which is still significantly more than the famous number googol, 1 followed by 100 zeros, which in its turn is much more than the number of atoms in the observable universe. Penrose's number is a 1 followed by 10 to the 123rd power amount of zeros. Bigger than the famous incredibly large number googolplex. We are extremely lucky then. Unless of course the one who planted the seed, a god, knew it was going to create a universe. Seems obvious, right? Otherwise it seems way too unreal that our seed just won those unimaginable odds. Who would have planted the seed anyways? It wouldn't just appear into existence without a creator, and then also just happen to win these odds. Here we come to another paradox. Let's call it the creator paradox. Now let's go back to only having one universe. The universe is everything and nothing was before it. But who created it then? How come everything so detailed just popped into existence? Someone must have created it, a god, simple, the problem is solved. But who created God then? Simple, nothing. But now we're back to square one. If God created the universe, God must be at least as complex as the universe itself, if not more. How could God just pop into existence? Someone must have created God. God may have existed forever, but who let that happen? And why couldn't the universe also have existed forever? Now we're stuck in a loop. I don't think we will ever know. Okay, let's go back to the grandfather paradox, which is a little less confusing. But not for long. Your life is on a branch, parallel to other branches, your friends, family, and everyone around you's life. And they are constantly splitting. What if you manage to go back in time by exceeding the speed of light and moving backwards up the waterslide, and down the tree branch? And kill your grandpa, you would cut off the tree branch at that exact point in his life, and also your own life higher up in the tree. But what happens to you? Do you die? Kinda. Your existence is completely gone due to your action. But this action didn't grow a new branch, it did the opposite. But this breaks the rules of the tree. This makes the entire tree collapse. Our whole universe, gone. Of course a new tree was created where you didn't go back in time and kill your grandpa, as well as one where you decided to buy a coffee with him instead, and one where you tried to kill him but failed, and maybe one where you ended up in the Triassic period. Or did it? There are higher dimensions than this. This entire forest is just like a flat surface, like a paper that's infinitely flat in the next dimension. And it's wrapped around a branch on a much bigger tree in a higher dimension. The multiverse. The universes can die naturally, like the heat death, where all energy is evenly spread out in the universe and nothing can move. This would make the top of the branch representing that universe grow a little flower, and leaving that tree higher up the multiverse's own waterslide. But an unnatural sudden error erasing the whole universe from ever existing, removing it from the waterslide means a tiny branch starting to collapse more and more in the multiverse, history disappearing, that makes the whole multiverse collapse too really fast. But there are other multiverses too, but they're all collected in another even higher dimensional tree, which suffers the same fate, etc., etc., all the way up to infinity. The tree containing infinitely many trees, collapses as well, but it creates another infinite tree where none of this ever happened, but if this never happened it wouldn't have been created, just like that, another paradox. But if the first tree was infinite, how could there be anything else? How is there room for anything beyond infinity? Imagine a spiral, becoming smaller and smaller, just continuing to spiral down into the microscopic world. But it would stop at atom size, right? What if it didn't? But it has to reach the middle at some point, right? No, it just completes half the distance left to the middle, forever. But that still isn't infinite. I can just draw a circle and fill it in, and it would contain this entire spiral, and more. Now you switch perspective and see that the spiral is in the third dimension, appearing to get smaller and smaller because it stretches further away. It stretches infinitely much further away. But if you switch the perspective back, it doesn't appear to be big at all. You could fit another infinite spiral right next to the first one. If we had drawn this spiral on a paper, we could fit 10 others right next to it. But the spirals are third-dimensional and the paper is two-dimensional, so how would that work? Let's just use the paper once again like an example to try and explain the fourth dimension, just like on the multiverse tree. If we imagine the fourth dimension like how the third dimension looks, and the third dimension would just be a paper in this world. And a fourth-dimensional being can fit 10 of these infinite spirals on this paper, and it still takes up so little space in their world. Actually, it doesn't take up any space at all, literally. But it has to take up a little space, even if it's microscopic, otherwise they wouldn't be able to see it. This paper is not actually a paper, because a paper is actually three-dimensional, and would be four-dimensional in this situation. It has a little depth. But drawings on a paper then? They don't go through the tiny depth of the paper, they lay on the surface. But even the ink in the drawings has a little depth. In this fourth-dimensional world, the so-called paper has one whole less dimension. For the creatures in this world, it would be like an infinitely flat surface for us, which we can still see from above but not from the sides. So a creature in this world can make this paper infinitely long, containing an infinite amount of spirals. The creature can then fold it in half again and again, until it's invisible. But it's infinite, so it can't get smaller. But it's also nothing in this universe, taking up zero space. So yes, they can fold it infinitely, until it's invisible. They can then do this with infinitely many papers, and it would still be nothing. But a fourth-dimensional infinite spiral would be absolutely infinitely much larger than a third-dimensional infinite spiral. And they're both infinite. And don't get me started on higher dimensions. How could this be? Are some infinities larger than others? This thought is not new. George Cantor came up with this idea in the year 1874. People state that he has also proved it to be true. But has he really? Another example is that there are infinitely many numbers, but there are still more irrational numbers. If we count to 10, there are 10 numbers. But if we count tenths of numbers there are 90. Both the whole numbers and the tenths go on forever. But there are more tenths. So that proves the theory right. Or does it? What if the tenths just appear to be more because they start of more? If you cut this infinite line of numbers, with both tenths and wholes into a finite amount, with a final number, there are 9 times as many tenths. But we're talking about infinity here, there is no end, no final number. The tenths start of as more but they eventually even out as there is no end to it. If you cut infinity in half, or tenths, or in grams number of pieces it's still infinite. So is the theory false? But irrational numbers go further than tenths or trillionths or Graham's numbers, they too go all the way to infinity. So what happens if you cut infinity in infinitely many pieces? Is it still infinite? If you take a number and divide it with itself you always get the number 1. But infinity isn't a number, it's a concept. So does it stay infinite or does it become the number 1 when divided by itself? According to this theory it should become finite if it's divided by a so-called larger infinity, but how can we know? How can anyone know? I think our understanding and comprehension of infinity is way too little to be sure, and that amount of understanding is probably unreachable for us. Maybe infinity doesn't even exist. Or does it? If you had 25 infinitely large empty coffee cups in your kitchen, and one infinitely large filled coffee cup, you could fill all the other ones one after another, and still have the same amount of coffee in the first cup, but this breaks the law of conservation of mass, matter cannot be created or destroyed. So infinity physically can't exist. But it can still exist in the non-physical world. Just like numbers, they don't exist physically, they just explain the quantity of something physical. So if infinity doesn't physically exist, doesn't that mean the universe can't be infinite? Yes it can. How? If the universe is everything, unlike the spirals, a true endless infinity, that can't have anything outside it. Matter couldn't be created with that infinity, because there is no room for new matter, so if the universe can be infinite, the multiverse can't exist. Yes, it can too. If every universe in the multiverse was infinite and was next to each other like the spirals in a higher dimension with unbreakable, incomprehensive walls, let's say they consist of wormholes that lead you back to the middle, they would still have taken up all space possible. Wait, what about the slide? Did it collapse with the forest? Let's go back to the first tree. It's in the fourth dimension, but isn't time the fourth dimension? I think time is in every dimension, coexisting with every world. That every dimension has a slide of its own, but it's just somewhere beyond our sight, probably for the better. I think that because it interacts entirely with our world, but can barely be interacted with, but still, it can at least be interacted with a little, in time dilation, and higher dimensions cannot be interacted with in any way at all. That's why it can't be the fourth dimension. I think that just like the wormhole theory, the fabric of space can be bent and create a shortcut to another place in the universe, the fabric of time can be bent, like time dilation, and maybe even time travel. You might say that wormholes can't be real in the first place. But think of it like a two-dimensional world, on a sheet of paper. If you bend the paper, beings who live in that world would not be able to tell, since you're bending it in the third dimension. They could just walk around the curvature in the third dimension, not knowing it's curved. But if you touch two corners on the paper, the people on the paper could walk between two totally different places in their world. It would just seem like a portal to them because they can't comprehend curvature, just like they can take the one-dimensional world I mentioned earlier, which is just a line, that consists of 4 points and connected into a circle. The one-dimensional being knows that it has to go past B and C to get from A to D. But now it can just take a shortcut from A to D. Now think of our third dimension like the paper again, and you are a fourth-dimensional being. The corner thing would still work, and even if you just bend the paper into two parallel halves of the paper that are connected in a curve. If something was dense enough, maybe it could stretch the paper, in this scenario the fabric of space, down to the other parallel part of the fabric, connecting them and letting you pass through and into a totally different place in the universe. A wormhole. So how many dimensions are there really? Some say that there are 10, some say 4, some say only 3, but I guess only a god can know. But I got one last question: can God create a rock so heavy not even he himself can lift it? Maybe, just maybe, he made one tree where he could and one where he couldn't. Thanks for watching.